So Aptera was just concluding one of their more recent investor webinars, and there was a couple of slides they were jumping through. And one of them, I'm not sure if it was an intentional Easter egg or just a little bit of a slip up, but it had a lot of potential future Aptera models. And I think it should go without saying, but I'm gonna have to say it anyway, just so we're all clear about this. Aptera, both from conversations I've had on and off the record, is spending pretty much all of their time focusing on the auto cycle, okay? Their main focus is getting that vehicle out onto the market, mass producing it, finalizing all the little details to make sure that it's perfect, and these vehicles that we're talking about as mock-ups are just that. They're just mock-ups, okay? These are just renders. I don't think Aptera has spent a ton of time or engineering resources developing any of these future models, but they're out there. People are talking about them now, and I've got a lot of thoughts on them, of course, and I had several people reach out and ask me to do a video on them to just kind of weigh in on what the future of the Aptera as a company may look like. And honestly, as an efficiency fan, it gets me very, very excited to see pretty much all of these mock-ups showing some kind of super aerodynamic design, like as aero as you can get, and then covering it with solar cells to make solar mobility viable. So in the top left quadrant, I think we have three different kinds of vehicles, but I have to admit, of everything on this list, these three are probably the most traditional slash familiar. It starts off with what looks like a mid-size sedan that definitely tapers off in the back a lot to bring down that coefficient of drag, although similar to what other people have brought up, I'm surprised there's not too much emphasis on covering up the wheels. That was common in the old days with the EV1, and Aptera is still doing it with their auto cycle, of course, to reduce aerodynamic drag. You cover up those wheels because they can result in a huge amount of drag, and you can't cover up the front wheels as easily typically because they have to turn, but the back tires usually just stay in line. These mock-ups, I guess, didn't want to fuss around with that, but right next to that mid-size sedan, to me, it looks like much more of a full-size sedan. I guess you could look at it as Aptera's 3 right next to Aptera's S. Honestly, fairly similar in functionality. One just is a bit longer, and that could unlock more solar cells, so more free miles every day from sunlight. Or, of course, it could just be more storage in the back for people who want more, which is fun. And then behind their Model S, I see some kind of crossover, one that definitely wants to be as aerodynamic as possible, but I have to admit it looks and feels very familiar to a Model Y. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these mock-ups are just partnering with maybe existing automakers on just slapping a lot of Aptera design attributes on existing vehicle platforms, because there already are several out there on the market. So those could result in a much faster development timeline if they didn't have to design every aspect of the vehicle from the ground up. You just focus on, let's make the exterior super efficient and then cover it with Aptera Solar and see what kind of mileage we can actually get out of one of these things. I understand why they would want to explore existing form factors, just because they're probably what people are comfortable with, but near the bottom of the page is where we get what I think would be more like an all the way through and through vertically integrated from the ground up designed pickup truck from Aptera, which is a really cool look. Honestly, when I pictured Aptera making a pickup truck, I didn't expect it to have such great ground clearance. To me, it kind of feels more like a shark in a way, like very aquatic of a design, but lots of room for those wheels to grab and do a lot of great off-roading. But I have to imagine with such a lifted design overall, and with all those exposed tires, this would probably not be bringing in that many miles of sunlight. The solar might be just kind of for fun. It's a really great mock-up. I do think, honestly, it looks gorgeous, and they did a great job with it as a mock-up, just as a proof of concept of what's to come. But practicality-wise, when I look at it, I still think, how does that tonneau cover work? You know, I get that the tonneau cover adds a bunch of solar, but it doesn't look like the kind of cover that could roll up. It looks like the kind of bed that you'd probably have to keep sealed and closed pretty much all the time, and maybe it pops up pretty high for larger payloads, but with a cover like that, it's got to be modular, or you're just going to increase your frontal area drastically. So it makes sense to me why they're not throwing this like front and center on their website. They're clearly very focused with the three-wheeler, but I do often wonder what it would be like to design the most aerodynamic possible pickup truck, and Aptera, more than anybody, is probably most set up to do that. And then right above the pickup truck mock-up, they have what to me kind of looks like a last mile delivery van. Clearly not something meant to go high speed. It's not a very aerodynamic design. They're just kind of showcasing that they could perhaps make some kind of small delivery focused vehicle that never really needs to go that fast, but could be charging itself passively. But I have to admit, out of all the mock-ups on this page, the one that is the most interesting to me is the one in the top right corner. This is pretty close to what I've always envisioned as like kind of my dream vehicle, because the three-wheeled Aptera is great, of course, and that's the one that I have on order, and that's what I hope my next vehicle is. Really nothing else on the market right now has me excited as much as the three-wheeled Aptera, so I'm really pumped that they're getting together the production funding and the production tooling. That's all great and fantastic, but this design is honestly one I wish they would go after next, like making their own variants of the Model 3 or Model S or Model Y. Those are all cool, and they're probably the most cost-effective way to launch a four-wheeled vehicle on the market, but designing a shape that is able to fit far more people on the inside. And keep in mind, three-row SUV market is big. Like, there is a lot of competition in this space, specifically because there's a lot of demand for it. People are looking for cost-effective ways to move around not just 5 people, but up to 7. And that's one of the reasons I was so pumped and excited to check out the Lucid Gravities, because they were targeting, you know, around 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour for a 3-row 7-seater SUV. And I think there's not probably a lot of designs out there that could beat the Lucid Gravity, but this one in the top right corner to me is one of them that could do that. It's that perfect blend of hood to windshield to roof, and yes, it is quite long. Like, the wheelbase on it is pretty extended. It's almost like a limo in certain regards, but I think if your focus is efficiency, which has always been Aptera's goal from the beginning, that's kind of the way you would maximize cargo capacity and occupancy while still prioritizing efficiency, because with a 3-row SUV design that's pretty tight from the sides, you don't increase your frontal area that much. Obviously, it doesn't seem to have a huge emphasis on off-roading capability, but I don't think most people do. There's a lot of Rivian owners out there that like to think they're off-road champions, but most of their life their car is just driving around on flat ground, and this vehicle I think would be perfect for that. It would be the people mover, and the great design about having that seamless taper between hood to windshield to roofline is you can maximize the amount of area for solar exposure. And the number that kept sticking in my head when thinking about what is Aptera gonna make next after the three-wheeler was, obviously, when you make a larger vehicle that weighs more and has a larger frontal area, more rolling resistance, you're probably not going to be able to maintain 10 miles per kilowatt hour, right? That's already a pretty mind-blowing spec that we're not even entirely sure if the three-wheeled Aptera is going to hit, but the fact that it's getting close to that is pretty nutty. But let's say if you could get a fairly large vehicle that's quite a bit different from the two-seater, kind of differentiate the market a little bit, you want to avoid any kind of cannibalization. The three-wheeler, of course, makes sense as a commuter vehicle, great for traveling salespeople, great for single people or couples without kids. But if you want to differentiate a little bit and you want to grow up the profitability of the company, I would suggest making a vehicle that leans more onto the higher price, because there's a lot of people out there that we've seen with the tremendously great sales of the Rivian R1S that are willing to pay top dollar if the vehicle can fit that many people, and it's great at camping, and it's great with storing a lot of stuff. And by leaning into this super aerodynamic, super eye-catching design, you could probably double up on the solar cells, so go from 700 watts to 1.4 kilowatts of solar. And as long as that kind of tapered off edge design is able to achieve somewhere in the ballpark of 5 miles per kilowatt hour, which is still pretty aggressive in regards to efficiency, especially for a vehicle of that size. But again, I think that vehicle looks a lot more aerodynamic and a lot more efficient than a Lucid Gravity, and that's targeting 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour. So I'm not saying it would be easy, but if it were possible for them to hit 5 miles per kilowatt hour and start racking in about 8 kilowatt hours a day, that could net result in a 3-row SUV that's still capable of getting more than enough miles from sunlight every day to cover most Americans' daily driving, which is around 30 to 40 miles of range per day. I feel like that's when solar mobility starts to make a lot of sense. Like on the pickup truck and maybe the sedans or the crossover, I'm not sure that the surface area on them is enough to really bring in that much meaningful solar range. Like maybe they're looking more like 10 or 20 miles of range per day, just because it doesn't feel like there's enough surface area for the solar. But that vehicle in the top right corner is kind of the closest to my dream vehicle that I pitched with that Honda Saloon concept. Really aerodynamic, really tapered off so that the air just kind of peacefully glides around the vehicle down the freeway, and you maximize the area for solar cells so that you can get, on a good day of course, when the sun is shining bright, well over 30 miles of range per day, and that's how much people are driving on the daily. And again, you'd have 3 rows to work with. So this would be an incredibly functional vehicle. It'd be a great family car and have tons of room for strollers or cargo or coolers or bikes or whatever you want to throw in the back. And I think Aptera as a whole is really great at kind of redefining what form factors are. It's really hard to put their first vehicle, the three-wheeler, into any specific category. I mean, legally, I guess it's an autocycle, but it's really nothing like a motorcycle, and it's really not that much like a car. So they found the most efficient footprint that doesn't really blend into an existing form factor to achieve their goals of efficiency to the maximum. And I think that the best way to keep that tradition going would be to kind of redefine what an SUV and what a pickup truck can be. And I honestly think that vehicle in the top right could probably fill the needs of a lot of pickup trucks and SUVs out there. As I've always been saying, you know, they're a very popular segment, both SUVs and pickups, but they're far too similar to each other. So I wish there would be kind of a shared platform so that you could make one vehicle that just with a few modifications could have the functionality of both. Obviously, there's always these compromises when it comes down to this is better at off-roading, but this one's better at efficiency. And I think the Aptera community and their fan base is going to be far more interested in seeing what they can achieve in regards to miles per kilowatt hour and miles added back for free from sunlight, because there's already a lot of brands out there that are far more interested in off-roading and being really great at that. And I don't think the off-roading emphasis really goes that much hand in hand with the efficiency focus, and there's usually a lot of compromise when you try to put those two together. So any of these vehicles, if Aptera decided to make, of course I would still be super excited to learn more. I would want to drive them, I would want to check them out as soon as possible. But if I had to pick one that I'd say you should focus on that one next, three-row SUV market is able to justify fairly high selling prices, and with Aptera's efficiency focus, they could probably fit, you know, if they're able to achieve that awesome 5 miles per kilowatt hour, you could put a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack in that thing and still get 300 miles of range, which I think is plenty for most people who are driving around three-row SUVs. You know, if you got kids in the back, you're usually not driving 400, 500 miles between charges. They need to take a break. They need to get out anyway. But I can already tell you, there's no three-row SUV on the market that can get by with a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack right now. And the battery pack, as you guys know, is usually the most expensive part of the EV. So if they're able to achieve a really, really tiny battery pack and still able to get good range out of it, they could probably undercut all of the other three-row SUVs on the market and still have really good margins for it. So they weren't asking for my opinion on these models, but that's how I feel. Lots of cool stuff I'm sure that they have in the pipeline, but again, end of the day, their main focus is on that three-reeler, and these I'm sure are just mock-ups. There's probably not a lot of time or money going into the development of these. They're clearly not flashing them around front and center, so they're not trying to win more people over, and that's something about Aptera that I've always applauded and acknowledged, is their extreme focus with just that first vehicle, not having too many options or too many colors or powertrain choices. They're just keeping it simple and saying most people want the launch edition with the 400-mile range and the full solar package, so that's what we're going to make. And now they have, I believe, well over 10,000 orders just for that launch edition model, which really streamlines and simplifies the manufacturing process, which is really important and key for an early startup like they are. But what do you guys think? What other vehicles do you think Aptera should explore? Of the ones that we saw in the mock-up, which one do you think would be the most interesting? Feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.